All right, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the 103 Amazing Facts about the Black Indian of the Western Hemisphere. It was originally written by Haudenosaunee P. Canyon, a non-reservationist, in the year 2003. It has been updated, illustrated, and demonstrated by me, King Moves, in 2021 for you. So, on this episode, we're going to talk about how important the Iroquois Nation was to the forming of the United States. I don't think a lot of people know it. I don't think enough people acknowledge it. And I know that a lot of us don't understand that that is some of our ancestors. So let's go ahead and get today's lesson started, all right? Number 37. The U.S. constitutional government is a plagiarized copy of a Black Indian governmental system, the Iroquois Nation. Number 38. The Founding Fathers did not find anything. They went to Black Indians, the Iroquois Nation, seeking assistance to break away from their chief back in England, King George III. The Iroquois Nation taught them their system of government. The only part the so-called Founding Fathers left out was the matriarchy. Black Indian women ruled the Iroquois Nation. So, today, we're going to look at an overview of who the Iroquois were and their contribution to what became the United States and its Constitution. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get to it, y'all.
The Constitution of the United States did not just happen, you know. As the guns of revolution fell silent and the smoke cleared, what remained was a lukewarm alliance of 13 states inadequately governed by a document called the Articles of Confederation. So divergent were the interests of the states, so unstable was our western frontier, that many doubted our ability to keep on keeping on. We had beaten the British, but could we survive ourselves? In 1786, states representatives met in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss the difficulties of interstate commerce. Nothing much was agreed upon except that another meeting would be necessary, and so in the autumn of that year, the states were invited to send delegates to Philadelphia to take into consideration the situation in the United States. And it was this congregation which Thomas Jefferson, then United States Minister to France, it was this congregation to which he would refer as an assembly of demigods, a compliment intended. The history books would call it simply the United States Constitutional Convention, for it was there and then that our Constitution was born, or was it really? Although James Madison is widely recognized as the father of the Constitution, and James Madison was in fact its principal architect, let this day forth each of us remember that he was a student of world governments. He was admittedly influenced by other systems of social order, and that brings us to an already established Constitution. Until we came along, it was a one-of-a-kind republic on this planet. It was a confederacy of democratic sovereign states, which voluntarily had delegated certain broad prerogatives of sovereignty to a federal government, and those prerogatives were defined and limited by a constitution. No, we were not the first. Ben Franklin, in fact, was particularly impressed by the document I'm describing for you. He admired those who had created it, and once upon a time he wrote in effect that if they could do so, we could do so. Franklin had been studying their form of government for decades. They had a three-chambered parliament, which bears such a striking resemblance to our Senate and House of Representatives and Supreme Court. Among the modern concepts of democratic rule established by this other republic are wide representative election, senatorial plurality, absence of hereditary sovereigns, and of course the basic freedoms, and notably unilateral freedom of religion. Tom Jefferson was another admirer of the system, of that equitable, ingenious Constitution. Many scholars have suggested that this other republic was the intellectual progenitor of the United States of America, that this other Constitution the one which provided a confederacy of democratic sovereign states, which voluntarily delegated certain broad prerogatives to a federal government, defined and limited, that this other constitution was a pattern for ours. For you see, the remarkably similar republic to which I refer predated ours by 300 years. It was the League of Iroquois nations. It was the Indians who taught us about freedom. And now you know the rest of the story.
All right, so as you just heard him say, they know who they got the Constitution from, or the idea of democracy from. They did not know what that was. They didn't come here with that idea or that ideology. That's not a European ideology. Okay, that is a indigenous aboriginal ideology. And it was based off of different groups of Indians that decided that they didn't want to keep warring with each other. Because let's face it, we still do the same stuff today. We fight with each other, a lot of infighting. And they was doing it back then. And the truth is, that's exactly how the Europeans were able to come in and take control, because they could play all the sides against each other. But this that we're looking at right now, this is a resolution from the 80s that was acknowledging that the Iroquois contributed to the Constitution. You know, this is not a fictitious thing, y'all. This is a legitimate thing. I want you to know that. So I'm not going to hold you. Let's go ahead and get into the storyline.
By the time the English colonists came to America in the early 1600s, 5 Indian nations, the Mohawks, the Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and the Senecas, had joined together to create what came to be called the Iroquois Confederacy.
The main goal of the Confederacy was to keep the peace among its members and resolve conflicts.
The building blocks of Iroquois society were longhouses, wooden cabins that stretched up to 200 feet in length. Several nuclear families, all related on the mother's side, shared a single longhouse. Family members tended their own separate hearth where they cooked, slept, and kept warm. As they shared the longhouses, the 5 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy also shared the hunting grounds of what is now New York State, but they remained independent of one another.
They ended up becoming a very powerful and dominant group by the end of the 17th century in upstate New York.
Though they were allies in times of war, the individual tribes had their own trading partnerships with European settlers. Sometimes they sided with the British, sometimes with the French. The Iroquois played one side against the other until they got the best deal. This strategy allowed the Iroquois to remain powerful for most of the 18th century.
It's really not until the American Revolution that the power of the Iroquois becomes seriously diminished.
The Iroquois decision to side with the British during the American Revolution proved a disaster. It destroyed the powerful and prosperous Confederacy.
A number of major campaigns were launched against the Iroquois during the American Revolution, destroying villages, destroying their crops. And one of our best records of how wealthy and successful the Iroquois were at this point in time are the records from these American expeditions against the Iroquois of just how much they destroyed.
During the war, the Iroquois lost their land and their lucrative trading networks. As a result, once the revolution had ended, many Iroquois abandoned their longhouses and fled to British Canada. The ones who stayed behind struggled to survive.
Ideas about democracy in the U.S. have 3 fundamental sources. 1, notions of democracy taken from the ancient Greeks. Not really. Notions of democracy taken from enlightened philosophers. Probably not. Notions of democracy and confederacy taken from the Iroquois Confederacy. Exactly. Okay, because they didn't even understand this system. So they didn't get it from their people That's not where they got it from. They got it from us. They got it from us because we formed democracies and confederacies. They didn't even have those things where they came from. And so they definitely didn't know about it, and they didn't make it up, and they didn't, they did, as far as laws go, incorporate some of those other things, the philosophies from their writers and the Greeks, and they put those laws together that way. But the idea of democracy and the idea of a confederacy came from us. They learned that by watching us. And then they got all of their will to do things on this land from us also. Somebody here had to anoint them and had to teach them and had to allow them to do these things. They didn't just come over here and take over like, the way that we've been taught. That's just absolutely not true. They didn't come over here and establish anything without making treaties and deals with the peoples whose land they were on. There were many, many tribes, all up and down the eastern seaboard. Okay? So, differences between Iroquois and the U.S. system. Protection of private property essential to the U.S. system. Private property not recognized in the Iroquois system. No president or executive branch in Iroquois system. Individual rights not as important as community for the Iroquois. Impeachment by elder women in the Iroquois system. Decision making by consensus for Iroquois system. War recruitment was voluntary, not hierarchical military authority. No permanent army or police force. Iroquois laws were unwritten and passed on orally. No secrecy allowed in Iroquois system. All meetings are public. Sachems, leaders, were not paid for their jobs. No taxes, no bureaucracy, no prison. So, what all of this really tells you is, again, like I said earlier, all of the things that they incorporated into the United States governmental system pertaining to, the laws with, like, locking people up and things like that. That's not how we did. We didn't do that. We didn't have to. And the biggest thing that they took was the matriarchy. When the Europeans came here with their patriarchy, saying the men run everything and the men tell everybody what to do, that's not how we did, because as we all know, we listen to our mothers, okay? And the mom, the queen, the empress, whatever title you want to give her, she ran the show here. All land was transferred through the women.
The Iroquois were a group of several Native American tribes that shared a language and similar culture. The word Iroquois came from French traders, but the Iroquois preferred to call themselves the Haudenosaunee, a word that means people of the longhouse. This name came from the 50 to 150-foot longhouses in which many Iroquois families would live together. Located in what is now the northeastern United States, the Iroquois society was a matriarchal society, meaning that women were the leaders and landowners. The Iroquois family lines were traced through the women, not through the men. While the chief of each tribe was a man, he was always chosen by the clan mothers. The Iroquois League of Nations was made up of 6 Iroquois groups who joined together to form a central government. The government had a council that made decisions to keep peace between the nations and a written constitution, or set of rights. The founding fathers of America were so impressed with the Iroquois League of Nations that they used this system as a template for our United States government.
So yes, the matriarchy was the way of the indigenous people here who followed our elder women. That was who we respected, whose word we took. And again, that is who the land was passed through. So naturally, even now, you listen to what your grandmother tells you. Now, did she ever tell you you was from Africa? Most of us so-called Black Americans' grandmothers never said that. So why are you saying it?
There is a story about a total eclipse at the time of its creation. And at that time, if a person was killed by someone in another clan or in another nation, then you were bound to go and kill or capture at least one person from the group that did that. Hiawatha was a skilled speaker, speech maker, and so on. And he met up with Daganoweda, who some people say was a stutterer, but who had all these great ideas. And in one version of the story, they joined forces to try and stop the blood feuds. They then enunciated the Great Law. There is significant influence on the development of American government by Iroquois Haudenosaunee people. The direct influences are the idea of separation of powers, sovereignty in the people, that's we the people. Also, of course, the notion of federalism. The Great Law of Peace, maintain peace within the Six Nations, but also developed a model for defense of the Six Nations from external powers. And that, of course, was very interesting to the 13 colonies. Benjamin Franklin published a book called Indian Treaties. In them were speeches by Haudenosaunee and other Native American leaders about peace, about government, and so on. In one instance, in a treaty in Pennsylvania, an Iroquois chief said, you should think seriously about uniting along the lines like us. Then at the Albany Plan of Union in 1754, Franklin uses that as a model and develops the first plan for the union of the colonies. There is a group of Iroquois chiefs that come to Philadelphia, and they are actually sleeping on the second floor of Independence Hall. John Hancock is presiding over the Continental Congress at the time, and the Iroquois had been invited earlier to come down and view this new Continental Congress, and after looking for several weeks, they then make John Hancock the Great Tree. In 1785, when there's great frustration in the government and with the Articles of Confederation, three guys say, we need to go and examine the Iroquois more closely and then bring that back, and maybe we can construct a new constitution. Those three guys are Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. Jefferson becomes the ambassador to the French, and with Monroe, Madison goes and he rejoins his friend the Grasshopper, who's an Oneida chief who he had known for a long time.
The story recorded in this belt tells of a warrior named Hiawatha, who meets a prophet known as the Peacemaker.
Hiawatha da hajero tene tini Haudenosaunee tu wasagari honyo. Nekti tikna hoyata wane ne Hiawatha. Agwegu saguya ogum'a ya guni he ya te. Tadotar ho wasagori ti wasaguda anar ho. Zero ni gun kwatara adak to je wa to jungun Hiawatha. Ti wa gundi jenezora wa gundi ne ka getsko tanu wa ogonda ne ti ganu wa gumsu ga gerunyu ne karaka ta warere.
The story goes that he came up with a way of helping a person who was in grief by using this wampum to clear their eyes, open their ears, clear their throat so they could speak clearly.
Using the purity of shells to bring a person to a clear state of mind is called the condolence ceremony. It was invented by Hiawatha, and the Haudenosaunee still practice it today.
Hiawatha no Haudenosaunee tu hunja taroro ge nero dienersu. Oni yote aga kayo ko haga kanyo ke haga tano so dinunduane aga. Skanagara seratsu wahni gueni ne asagodi ni guhragwe nuni tano skatle ahadi tohayo. Nekti skanagara sera yate honatundatu ahunja atara onenda ke haga. Onda Hiawatha ya honohrota se nerungwe sagorio saguya ugun'a. Rotkunzerakso tadu tarhu. Neamha to sats no serawana ne tio hunzate.
He was a sorcerer. He had supernatural powers. He could communicate with the birds and rattlesnakes and wolves and the animal world, and they would help him. He was a mean man. His name was Tarudahu.
To convince Tarudahu to join the new Confederacy, Hiawatha and the Peacemaker seek a powerful ally. A woman named Jigonsase.
Jigonsase was the first clan mother. She helped bring peace to the Iroquois, to the Haudenosaunee.
The Peacemaker strikes a deal with her. If she can stop the war, she can choose the chiefs.
Jigonsase wa kunwadia daniyandago ohnere sumaranum kwizerake. Oneki wa hagwini hari hoyena neskona. Jigonsase wa tuwana gararna. Tira di handu ne agweguru di enersu diruna jataror o handu wa tuwataste.
Jigonsase transforms Tarudahu's mind and he abandons war. With the final obstacle overcome, the Peacemaker assembles representatives of each nation.
Sadia tatsuru di enersu da hadihawe ne onegorha. So dinindawane aga, kayo haga, onenda ke haga, oneyote aga, tanu kanyo ke haga. Etone girun shunito wataji ne tararu ne onegorha sum anegaswanta arunyade.
Under a total eclipse of the sun, the Peacemaker holds the newly woven Hiawatha belt, and with the nations gathered beneath the tree of peace, he speaks the law of peace for the first time.
Anda wano totako nam hat kano testo nerata se goa. Ti Josué agwego yung kwatario stakwa yung guadi. Luwe ang tito wano dota ne to nerata se goa da no tonon tamwe tiwa kwari wayena na gayenere goa. Ti wari ho wanata zion ta watka we zion quadrio ne wis ni unju hunzake. Ta no skona onko hake tina de waderonyo ne ngana
Side note, the games that the identity game that has been played on us over the years has left a lot of us not believing that we are actually indigenous Aboriginal Americans, aka Indians. When you see things like this, it looks like these people are not us. And the truth is, we were all different complexions, different hair textures, different facial features. We were never just one type of people. And they, meaning the Europeans, took it upon themselves to whitewash the ones of us that they held in high regard. So again, it makes you not believe that we are them and those are us, right? But the truth is, that was us. There's all kind of old pictures that will show you that, yeah, there was very much melanated people and very much so-called Negro type of people here, all throughout the Americas, not just in one place, not just in the Southeast, in the Northeast, and the West, North and South, okay? And we absolutely were everywhere on this planet first. So don't ever believe that you're not from here and your bloodline is not from here just because you don't look like the pictures the Hollywood people want you to see. Now, here's an artifact that I say only one of us would have needed. This is not an artifact one of those other type of folks would have needed, okay? And there are pictures and there are documents and everything to prove it. Okay, now look at this. This is an Iroquois chief. This is an Iroquois chief, and just looking at it, without thinking about it twice, you would have overlooked this and not seen yourself in this picture. That doesn't mean it's not your people. That is an Iroquois chief drawn by Charles de Wolfe Brownell in 1873. Okay? So before I cut out, I'm going to leave you with a couple of thoughts.
Mr. Long, we in archaeology don't go around digging into sacred burial mounds out of rude curiosity. We're seeking keys to understanding lost society, lost civilization.
Well, if you're so interested in Indians, why don't you try talking to a couple live ones?
I'm not an anthropologist.
Doc, you want to have a seat over here and finish reading the complaint?
Oh, thank you.
I did.
You guys might be surprised we dug in our brains instead of our bones.
All right, Mr. Long.
In the law, for example. Who do you think inspired the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution? Washington? Jefferson? Forget it. It was the Iroquois, man.
Really?
Yeah, it's true. Our self-government by chosen representatives, functioning in an effective common form is from an Indian concept. Yeah?
That's fascinating.
Of course, things don't always work out.
And how about food?
No, thank you. I would appreciate a cup of tea.
I'm afraid we don't have any water.
Where do you think you got tomatoes, potatoes, and squash, and popcorn?
Okay, Mr. Long.
And if it wasn't for us, you wouldn't be smoking that cigarette over there.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
So again, Canyon was right. They got the Constitution from the Iroquois Nation. They got the idea of a Constitution and the idea of a Confederacy from indigenous Aboriginals here in the Americas. So know that and understand that it's our time to get it right. We need to understand this history so we can get better. Till next time, y'all, check in with your man King Moves. Peace.